October 2nd, North Houston Space Society meeting. And then our, yes, in person. There we give a round of applause for that. Okay, the timings here are aspirational at this point, but anyway, I have a few opening remarks. Then Greg Stanley is going to give his wonderful space update since the last meeting. So this is actually, I think, be the first time you've done this in person.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, no, a long time ago.
Like 18 months or before. Yeah. Okay, and then we're going to have our feature speaker, Ellena Hyeji Joo. Okay, who's going to talk about what she covers in her book, Into the Unknown, Human Exploration in the True Space Age. Then we'll have some Q&A, and then afterwards we'll have some socialization, and then we'll wrap it up when they pick us up or people all leave. So y'all can stick around as long as you want. So I am Nathan Price. I am the president and founder of the North Houston Space Society. And I have a fondness for his cow in Terminal A, which is dressed up as an astronaut. So anyway, I have a lifelong passion for space exploration, and I've attended many conferences, the most recent of which was the Interstellar Symposium last week. And I plan to do a summary of all the stuff that not all the stuff that I learned, but some of the key highlights that I learned. So hopefully I'll come next month. So a quick introduction to the North Houston Space Society. We started out in my house. Our first meeting was January 6, 2018. So we're almost 4 years completed. So that's good. We've had many meetings in the library, on Zoom. We've taken a tour of nanoracks. That was supposed to be the first of many, but about 2 months after that, the COVID lockdowns happened. So I'm hoping we can go on a lot more tours next year. So the vision of the Space Society is people living and working in thriving communities beyond the Earth, and the use of vast resources of space for the dramatic betterment of humanity. And so that's what we're trying to promote. And welcome everybody to join us. There's our website, northhoustonspace.org. Sign up for our email list, join the National Space Society. And anyway, I want to let you know this meeting is being recorded, and we'll publish it later after we edit it. And if you're online, you can turn on and off your video. You can also mute and unmute. There's the chat feature. We have Masa monitoring the chat. So if you just let her know what's going on, she can make sure we're aware of that in the room. And then also, whenever it gets time to answer questions, people in the room can do it the old-fashioned way. Just raise your hand. But online, you have the ability to raise your hand as well. Okay, with that, let's move on to our next part. We'll have Greg come up. So Dr. Greg Stanley, a PhD in chemical engineering from Northwestern University. He's worked on a variety of projects, including Biosphere 2, which got to see, and he's the vice president. So let me go ahead and switch you over real quick.
So is the microphone in here, or is that
well, there? Oh, both actually.
Oh, okay.
So we'll just switch this on. Stick it on there. Stick it on there, and then we'll put this up, and then we'll put it in presenter. And I think I have to switch. Hold on just a second.
So is that part shown?
And we can get rid of this somehow. Yeah, right. I wonder how we get rid of the. Okay. There you go. We have this if you want to.
Oh, I can't just do it on here.
You can.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to start off with the. how's the sound? Is that reasonable?
A
A little louder, okay. Anyway, we're starting off with the monthly space news, covering roughly the last month. Okay. I'm not really in slide presentation mode, apparently.
I think a quick, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's not a touch screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and I promise I will actually get to all those pictures there. Okay, we'll start off with news about low Earth orbit kinds of things. First part will be that private space tourism, that is all private space tourism, has finally reached low Earth orbit. It's not just 10 minutes up and down. And also, there's some interesting experiments being carried out on the International Space Station, and we'll talk about some of those. So this is what I call the serious space tourism, in that it's really using the same hardware that we're actually going to use to get into space, leaving things, in orbit or beyond. So this was the first all private orbital mission. We've had private tourists in the past that have gone up into space, but typically they went up with a government astronaut or two or more, and they're not doing that now. This is really all private, where private citizens went up in a SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule. It was modified, and the modifications are kind of interesting. You can see it on the picture here. There's a little glass dome up on top. Normally that nose cone opens up, and that's where the docking occurs if they go and dock with the space station. But they're not doing any docking in this particular mission. This is just an orbital mission, not connecting up with the space station. So they put a nice big glass dome in there. The artist didn't really think this one through too much, because really the people that are in that capsule kind of want to see the Earth. So they, in the actual flight, they rotated it around, either facing downward or at least horizontally. They were up in a higher orbit than your typical space station orbit, well, the space station orbit, up at 364 miles, which is in the range, but it's definitely above it. That is, in fact, higher than anyone has been in 2 decades. 2 decades ago, there was the mission to repair the Hubble Space Telescope, and they actually went up higher than that. But so this is actually kind of quite an achievement here. It is interesting that this is fully automated. The whole thing doesn't actually, in theory, need any crew interactions at all. But of course, if something goes wrong, they wanted to be sure that people could handle it. They trained for 6 months to handle all kinds of emergencies. So they learned a little bit about orbital mechanics. They learned about all the systems on the capsule. This whole thing was a fundraising effort for St. Jude's Children's Hospital, led by the billionaire Jared Isaacman. He put in 100 million to kick things off, and I think they more than reached the goal they had, which was getting another $100 million. Elon Musk kicked in 50 million right there, so that helped. Now, in the past, typically, everybody has gotten money from NASA, well, including SpaceX along the way. This actually went the other direction, because they purchased services from NASA. They wanted communications through the satellite network that NASA uses. They used training facilities from NASA. So actually, in this case, SpaceX paid NASA about $1 million for their services. That's pretty cheap, partially because they did not have to pay for the space station itself. If you want to do anything at the space station as a tourist, you pay a lot of money extra for that. Now, they did identify a few improvements that were needed. In particular, Americans, we want Wi-Fi everywhere. Well, they didn't really have good Wi-Fi. So they're going to do that, and they'll do it through Starlink next time. They just weren't ready for that. That's why they went with the NASA TDRS system. And also, it turned out they had problems with their toilet. The fan broke down, and they had to, they're going to have to work on that for the next time. But people seem to put up with that. Now, taking a step back, this whole thing is still pretty consistent with what the new directions for NASA. They really hope, and by they, I mean most of the top management, they really hope that commercial interests are going to run all of the low Earth orbit operations, which would include the space station. At some point, the current space station is retired, and presumably some private space stations by companies like Axiom will be put up there. And the idea is that NASA will then purchase services as necessary to focus on deep space. There were a variety of experiments carried up there. One of them is 3D printing using regolith, simulated lunar regolith. Now, the idea there is that when you get to the moon, you want to protect yourself from radiation and temperature changes. So you want to build something once you get beyond just the ship itself. It's still a little iffy how it's going to work out digging into underneath. And until we've done more prospecting, we don't know how well that's going to work out. For the next best thing is just basically to build structures on the surface. And the same is true for Mars. So they're doing the same kind of thing. So they're looking into 3D printing for habitat construction. So they're doing some practice. They've done this kind of thing, obviously experimenting on Earth, but they want to try it in low gravity. So the moon at least has some gravity. It's really microgravity up at the space station, but that's an extreme case. They want to know, how is this going to work out? A second thing you're doing is there's a robot arm that was specifically designed for space that's gone up there. And the company that built this, a Japanese company called Gitai, they have a very ambitious goal. They basically say, you're going to have companies like SpaceX, they're going to do all the work to get people and equipment up into space. They want to do all of the mechanical work. In other words, they want to supply essentially robot arms to do everything so that people don't have to. Fairly ambitious kind of a goal. So they're setting up a robot, and what they're doing in this particular test is inside the Bishop airlock, they're going to do some assembly operations and sort of practice, and also cabling. Typically the kinds of things you would need to do if you're building structures in space. Like you might do space solar power structures or habitats or whatever. You need proof that it'll work. So this particular robot arm was designed for use in space. That is, the temperatures, the pressures, and so on. It has 8 degrees of freedom, which is a little unusually high. Your typical industrial robot has 6. Degree of freedom means basically how many things you can change to change your position. You need at least 6 in a typical industrial robot. You think about it, there's 3 dimensions, vertically, horizontally, and so on, just to get to a position, and then another 3 for what direction you want to point a tool. So typically you aim for 6 degrees of freedom. They went for 8, and that makes it a lot more flexible. That way you can work in tight enclosed spaces, you can work your way around things. They thought all that through. And for comparison here, I threw in a picture of a bionic arm that's typically is modeled more or less after the human arm, which is generally considered to have about 7 degrees of freedom. So this is actually doing a little bit better than that. So on a human or a bionic arm anyway, you typically have 3 directions of motion at the shoulder, 3 at the wrist, and you have an elbow as well. So that's where you get 7. So anyway, they're doing these experiments. Essentially, what's happened in the space station is they really are getting a lot more serious about figuring out how to settle space and doing these kinds of experiments to prove that we can do it. Next, they're doing some tests on metal corrosion in space. That's been an ongoing kind of a thing, and they're just doing more of that. They have a new CO2 scrubber technology they're trying out, they've tested out for a whole year. And also better heat dissipation for spacecraft. That's a constant problem, especially when you're going into re-entry. How do you handle the heat that's generated by friction with the air? This one's kind of interesting because what they're basically doing is just taking, they have a new heat shield they want to test out. They're basically just throwing the thing into the Cygnus cargo ship, along with all the other garbage they're putting in there, because that particular cargo ship is just returning to the atmosphere to burn up. It doesn't have any capability for landing with cargo. So they fill it up with garbage and they just they send it on its way and let it burn up in the atmosphere. But this time they're going to monitor inside of the the test. They're going to monitor how are the temperatures with this new heat shield. So that was kind of fun.
So the Cygnus is going to have a new heat shield on it.
No, it's actually, I guess it's actually inside. I mean, as that the Cygnus itself will probably burn up and then the stuff inside will burn up. It wasn't that clear to me exactly the mechanism, but one way or another, the whole thing burns up in the atmosphere because it's a throwaway spacecraft. Okay, the biological experiments are kind of interesting, and there's been a big upsurge in those lately because they've introduced a lot more automation for doing biological experiments. It used to be very, very time consuming. People had to watch things really closely and, introduce feeding or whatever it was they had to do. And they've automated a lot of that now. So there's been a big upsurge in that. Some of the things that are going on are mostly oriented toward the low Earth orbit or even high Earth orbit situation where you have microgravity and you have very high radiation levels. And so they're looking at things like the effect on human muscle growth and loss. They're doing some things, they're essentially taking integrated circuits and integrating them with muscle tissue growing on them. Very interesting things they're doing here. Similar things with bone tissue. The goal there is they need to figure out how to prevent so much bone loss. So whatever they can do, learn about this, they want to prevent bone loss because it does happen when low gravity. Plant germination and growth, they're doing a lot more work on that now. Ultimately, if you're going to be in space, you need agriculture. And unless you know how plants germinate and grow, you're never going to get very much out of it. So that's absolutely essential for settling space. Then they have some very specific animals. They have some squid they're taking up. There's a picture up here in the upper right corner of this slide. This particular test is really looking more at the interaction between the squid and the microbes that live in it. They have, their digestion obviously typically involves microbes, and also the immune system. And this is true for people as well. So they're using the squids here as an analog for people. How does the microbiome of all these microbes that live within you, how does that really work out in space? And they're studying that much more carefully in very carefully controlled environments, using squids in this case. And then there's tardigrades, which for people who have seen them, is sort of everybody's favorite animal. They are the ultimate outer space creatures. They can live 30 years without food and water. We already knew from previous tests that tardigrades can survive being in outer space. And I don't mean inside a capsule, I mean on the outside of a capsule. Back in 2007, they exposed them for a while. What happens is they can go into a kind of a dehydrated state where they essentially get rid of all the water, almost all the water in their bodies, and they can survive outer space. They're okay. They just basically reconstitute them. They come back and everything's fine. That was proven back in 2007. They can survive. And what does that mean, surviving outer space? Well, it means there's low temperatures. It's been shown that they can survive going down to 1 degree above absolute zero. So that's actually colder than space, which is probably more like 4 degrees. They can handle low pressure right down to pure vacuum. Nope, that's not a problem for them at all. It is for people. You know, that if you've ever seen any movies about people going out on the surface of Mars without a helmet, you know what that looks like. Low gravity, microgravity in the case of this, that doesn't bother them at all. Oxygen, losing that's okay too. They just go, as long as they're in that hibernating sort of a state, they don't need it. They can go probably 10, 20 years. And high radiation in particular, they can handle 1,000 times the radiation that people can. I mean, this is a drastic difference. So of course that raises the question, how do they do it? And they still don't really know. And that's why they want to watch this. And what they're going to do is they're going to watch how they adapt. And in particular, look at what genes get activated. So what they're doing is they're going to have 4 generations of these things up there. At the end of the first generation, they're going to freeze dry them, take them back to Earth. And then back on Earth, they're going to look at their genome very carefully to see which genes got activated. Because genetics is a funny thing. Is some genes become activated in response to environmental conditions. So they want to figure out what does it, and then what is the impact of those genes. So they're looking at that, and then they'll go through 4 generations doing the same thing, and they'll see what gets passed on and what doesn't. And the hope is that we can learn how they protect themselves. Maybe we can do the same thing with food. Maybe you can do it with medicine. Maybe we'll learn something that can help with people. For instance, they think that part of the radiation resistance is due to antioxidants. But generating a whole lot more antioxidants inside their system. And so they're going to watch for things like that. They're also looking at some brine shrimp. Those are the old sea monkeys, which also can be dried out, but not as dramatically as tardigrades. Ants and slime molds. There's pictures of tardigrades here. Most of them in reality are transparent, like the lower right corner picture. But the only thing there's actually 1,000 different varieties of them, by the way. And most of them are transparent. About the only thing they have in common is that they have 8 legs. You can only see 6 in most of these, but the last 2 legs are right on the very tail. So interesting experiments there. Okay, moving on to the moon. We've been following the saga of Artemis and the human landing system, HLS. Remember, Artemis is the program to go back to the moon to stay. The idea, American boots on the ground in 2024, hopefully with American feet in them, as a TV show, as a joke. So the human landing system, of course, is a big part of that. That is bringing the astronauts between a lunar orbit and down to the surface, and, down and then back. And of course, there was an award made to SpaceX to do that based on their Starship chip. That has been protested by Blue Origin, and that was ignored. And now they filed a lawsuit, and that's slowing it down. Nothing can happen with this now until November. So this is Blue Origin is really trying to gum up the works here. But NASA, in the meantime, at least kind of threw a bone to the people who lost out in that competition. There is a part of a program called Appendix N, which is paying for studies on how to do the next round of landings, basically future versions of Artemis. So the first 3 landings are already counted for, and this is going beyond that. but this is not very well defined. They're going to talk about the concepts and the risks. It's basically just throwing some money at them so to keep the competition alive, which is sort of a standard approach that's been used in defense and aerospace for a long time. You know, send some money off to the people who lost so that at least they keep in the game. Okay, Mars related, sorry to report you just missed it. You could have signed up for NASA's latest Mars habitat analog, but that ended in September. And I'll talk a little bit more about past and future habitat analogs, meaning simulated habitats. The new one that NASA is coming up with is called CHAPI. It's an acronym for Crew Health and Performance Exploration Analog. And the idea is, in the picture you see on the upper part of this slide, is giving a vision of what things might look like in a Martian settlement, where you do some 3D printing of a structure, you incorporate portions of the spacecraft that you came in, since you don't have any other use for them at that point. So this particular one is a new one. It's going to be built at Johnson Space Center, or in fact, it is already in progress. It's largely built already. It's about 1,700 square feet, and it's going to be printed 3D. You can see that in the lower left corner of this slide here. This is in the middle of the 3D printing. So the 3D printer itself is these posts over on the right-hand side of the picture. There's tracks so it can slide, across, and then there's a shuttle that goes back and forth with a 3D printer nozzle, which is shown in the lower right corner here. And it's extruding this stuff they call lavacrete, which is basically just Portland cement, but they throw in some lava, and they patented that. Now, this unfortunately uses water. This is just conventional. When you get down to it, this is basically conventional cement that we use on Earth. Probably not what you're really going to want for Mars ultimately, because that would take a lot of water. And if you're going to do that, that means you have to have a lot of extra water or processing steps. It just adds a whole lot of complexity. So what they're really working on is figuring out just how to just use a regolith itself. And that's true for both the moon and for Mars. I'll get to that in a minute. But the idea is essentially you melt it. And you can melt it with lasers, with microwaves, or any way you want. You turn the stuff into lava. There's variations called sulfur concrete where you can do it. You can do that on Mars, where there's sulfur compounds that are in the regolith combined with the aluminum oxide and the silicon dioxide and so on that's there. Pretty much, if you just mix it all up and melt it, you got a pretty good shot at actually getting something that's concrete. And it may not be as strong as Earth concrete, but then again, gravity isn't as high on Mars either, so that might not matter. So anyway, back to the missions. There's going to be 3 missions they've already talked about. Each will have 4 crew members. It'll start, the first one's in the fall of 2022. And as I was saying, you just missed your opportunity to sign up for it. They closed on September 17th. But there's missions coming up in 2024 and 2025. So you still have a chance. What they're testing is pretty much what most of the other Mars analog systems have been. They're testing physical operations. Do you have room to change your spacesuit? Does equipment work? Can you reach this valve? That kind of thing. Human behavior, again, that's been a part of all of them. Can people get along? What happens if they don't? And the food systems, how do you deal with food? So they're going to simulate resource limitations, equipment failures. Of course, they're going to simulate communication delays, and all the previous analogs have done that as well. And they're also going to have some simulated spacewalks using virtual reality. Now, what this thing looks like, I'll call your attention again to the lower left corner. It's not very big. It's 1,700 square feet. The crew quarters are on the left-hand side there. You can see there's room for 4 different people. They have 2 areas labeled crop areas, which are smaller, pretty much smaller than the toilets. That kind of tells you they're not really focusing very much on agriculture. They're kind of assuming that problem is going to be solved by someone else, because that's just not enough. That's not enough to support people for a long time. You can see the kitchen there. There's a second toilet and shower over on the right-hand side. So that is that particular program. And there have been plenty of others. Mars Society in particular has been quite active in doing this. There's a Mars Desert Research Station. In fact, NASA's gotten involved in that one. They also run an Arctic Research Station in northern Canada, which is in a northern area where it's kind of deserty. So it is very, very cold. And very isolated, trying to reproduce, the conditions on Mars as closely as possible. Yeah, you can see the pictures here, the Desert Research Station on the top right, and the next one is the Arctic Station. NASA has long run one in Hawaii, up in Mauna Loa, top of the volcano there. And right now, All these things, by the way, right now are pretty much on hold because COVID has slowed everything down, but they're going to get going again. And they're going to be doing more lunar simulations in the case of the Hawaii installation. You know, there isn't that much difference, you know, if you're going to be stuck inside of a tin can for Mars versus the moon. So, you know, they just pretty much put on sunglasses so you don't see the red dirt and you're good. The Russians have always been active in this kind of thing. They've had a facility, the current one's called NEK. They often have had the pressurized, sealed, airtight kind of containment systems, unlike most of the others on this page, which are not, other than Biosphere 2, which are not. They've had various projects and they have more plans. They've always been active in this. China is a newcomer. They're coming in on this. They have a Mars camp off in the Gobi Desert, northwest China. It looks like it's mostly for tourists, kind of a combination of Space Camp and Disney World. Remains to be seen. They are planning on doing some astronaut training there, is what they're saying. And they also have a Mars village in the Tibetan Plateau, and not actually, probably not that far from the other one. And that one is purely for tourism. I mean, they pretty much sell it as a Disney kind of a thing. So it remains to be seen how much research will get done there. And then there's a whole variety of previous ones. I'll just highlight Biosphere 2 really in a way was a Mars analog that was envisioned as being you know, a system to try out living in space. Their goal was way out there in the sense of being totally self-contained other than, you know, energy, basically totally sealed and living. And all these other ones really are kind of the other way. They're assuming still pretty much almost everything done mechanically. And the real answer we need is something in between. And that's what's coming along now. I'll highlight two of them. Mars Science City in Dubai, that had been on hold for quite a while. They hadn't acquired the land, or they had the land, but then it turned out Dubai was expanding so fast, the neighborhoods all filled in around it, and they decided that wasn't a good idea. So now they're moving ahead. They found some more remote land. It isn't that clear to me how much is really going to be tourism and how much is going to be real research. They do have a real space program. They did send a satellite to Mars after all. So they probably are doing something real there, but how much is tourism, I don't know. The other interesting one coming along is called SAM, or Space Analog for the Moon and Mars. This is by the University of Arizona. It is a sealed habitat for 1 to 4 people and plants. It's in construction, not fully funded. This one's interesting because it's at the Biosphere 2 site. They took the original test module, which was kind of a scaled down version of the final Biosphere 2, 480 cubic meters. That's shown in the picture on the bottom left of this slide. And it was built in '87. This picture was taken after that, but it gives you an idea. It wasn't all that big. But they're going to start with that. They've refurbished it, and they're also putting in new living quarters, a kitchen, a common area. You can see to the right-hand bottom side here, portions of that where there's an airlock on the far right-hand side, and there's some structures here. They're also going to be throwing in things like a synthetic lava tube, so to get people used to the idea of living maybe in a lava tube on Mars. And they'll have those CO2 scrubbers and so on. The main point for them is that they're trying to be more realistic. Starting with where we are now, where it's mostly mechanical life support, how do we make that transition toward getting more and more biology involved, more and more plants, basically? And they're going to be studying how do you make that transition and what does it look like? And also they're going to be making their computer models publicly available. There's a simulation it's sponsored right now by National Geographic, where you can build models and it's available to the public, and it's called SIMOC, and that will be available. Okay, that brings us to our question of the day. How many launches have there been since the last meeting? Take a guess. Those of you who are remote, if this is still working, are probably seeing, I think you're a little high on that one, but and that's the fun, you know, nobody really knows. Okay, that's a guess of 7. I think Nathan probably saw my slides, so he actually knows. And he's lying because the answer is not 7. Okay, we'll just go ahead and we'll cut to the chase here. The answer is 10. That's how many there have been since the last meeting. Unless something launched today, we'll throw that in next week. Or next month. There's not that much to report here. One failure among them. There's some big launches like Landsat's Earth Observation Satellite. These kind of things are big satellites. OneWeb's putting up some more of their internet service satellites and so on. But I think in the interest of time, we'll move along to questions, comments, and then we'll get on to the main speaker.
The one in Dragon, I think it was
Repeat which question?
Oh, I mean, if people ask questions, if you just repeat it, maybe people have stuff.
Okay, well, you're going to repeat it if you hear it from them, right?
Oh, the microphone's probably.
Oh, okay. All right. So anybody have any comments or discussion topics related to the news? Or how about from the people online? Masa, anybody have any? No? Okay, well, maybe we should just go ahead and move on to the speaker. Ellena Joo is very accomplished. She's grown up in 4 different countries, speaks 5 languages. She wrote a book, and the book, the picture here is in the lower left corner. You can get it. If you're quick, you can still get it for 99 cents on Kindle. But you have to be pretty quick about it. That goes away pretty soon. Her topic is Into the Unknown, Human Exploration in the True Space Age. And we're finally there. You know, in a way it was kind of fake before, but now we're really there. Her thoughts are on humanity's long-range future in space. You know, what does it mean? What are our values? What will we be? What happens when we do finally meet aliens, and how to prepare for that? So that's what her book is about. And rather than guessing, I'll turn it over to her.
Close to this. About to happen. Full screen. I guess this is step 11. Oh. Is there like presentation mode? Oh. This is like. We can move this out of the way, but you know how to put this into. Oh.
Oh,
cool. And then this is the mic for online, and you have a mic for the recording.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
Oh, it's not up there. One second. Oh, there's like present, so that's good. How do I get out of and I thought not extend, duplicate. So back to here. And then this to we can be standing.
Yeah, I'll be standing.
Okay. I think you should be good.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to try to amplify my voice so that people can hear online and people at the back of the room can hear me. But I think I've met most of you, but my name is Ellena Hyeji Joo. I am from South Korea, and currently I'm a senior at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, about to graduate. And yeah, as you can see, I published a book. And my book is called Into the Unknown, Human Exploration in the True Space Age. And you might be wondering, like, why does a student who studies international politics gets to write a book about space? Well, that's a great question. I will go further into how I ended up writing this book. To be honest, like, space isn't my main area of interest. I grew up with a variety of interests, but you know, I've always been curious about space, what's out there, why are we here? Yet I never considered myself like a space expert, right? But surprisingly, I have done pretty well for someone who has never considered herself an expert on space, because now I'm the #1 hottest new release on Amazon. Yeah, so it's kind of crazy, and I will get more into essentially how I collected the materials for the book. And I would like to say that in my book, I take on the role of the storyteller. And the majority of the content for my book is collected from people who work in the space field, and they've dedicated their entire lives to space. And this includes people from NASA to SpaceX, to people who work for startups in space technology, to people at SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence life. So yeah, but before I've talked, I think, enough about me, I want to get a little bit into you guys and throw the question kind of back at you. If any of you want to tell me, I'm very, very curious, why do you keep up with space and what got you into this field? And people online can, of course, join, comment why you have a love for space, why you're part of the Space Society. Anyone want to share their thoughts? Yes, Nathan?
You probably have to repeat it.
Yeah, right.
But I would say as a childhood, it was probably Star Trek. You know, this is
Star Trek.
Of humanity,
Yeah.
you know, going out into the cosmos and
Yeah.
discovering the unknown.
Yeah, Star Trek is a great one. Yeah, it's timeless almost. Still kids today are inspired by Star Trek. How about anyone else? Yeah?
I grew up with the space program, with the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo space programs.
Yeah.
And it was the most exciting thing I could think of as a kid, to watch all that happening and being real, and actually going to the moon.
Yeah.
So the notion of going even farther to the moon and then maybe to Mars or even farther just seemed like a natural progression. And I certainly hope to be a part of that.
Yeah. What's your name again?
Doug Hall.
Doug? So Doug, you said that for the people online, what got you interested in space is not only fiction, but also what's happening in the real world for you. You grew up with the Apollo, Mercury, Gemini, all those programs, and it was actually in the news for you growing up. So space almost seemed quite tangible to you. Anyone else want to share? It can be something silly. I asked this question before, and some people literally just said they like astrology. So that's what keeps them on their toes when it comes to space news. We'll have one more before we move on. Anyone care to share why they like space?
I like space.
Yeah.
Space drives human progress. I like space in terms of the new advancement in nuclear science, and computer science, and so I like space because of what it does to improve our economy.
Yeah. And your name is Keisha?
My name is Keisha.
Yeah, so Keisha, you said that you keep up with space because it's a great method to keep human advancement going. And it's a big driver for economy. It drives space technology, evolution, and all that. And I also noticed Ian, he said, I keep up with space because I think the technology of today makes space exploration and inclusion more of a possibility for people without the years of space experience. So essentially, I think Ian's touching upon how much more accessible space is becoming for people like you and me who may not have grown up, you know, trying to get into NASA or an astronaut training program, but space seems like something that we can still get involved with. Yeah, so I will talk a little bit more. Sorry?
I'm sick. I'm sorry. I said my husband's supposed to be at work, but is he out there? His name's Ian, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe it's your husband. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit more about why and how I wrote this book. So I, first of all, noticed a big gap in the mainstream media about the perception of space. And this may not apply to you guys because you all are very informed about what's going on in space. You know, we just saw the space news, and it was it was very detailed, right? And you guys understand the technicality of space technology and understand exactly what's going on. But for the mainstream audience, this is not the case, right? When people see space, they see this. They see the billionaires trying to compete each other to go into space. It's almost like for the mainstream people, like an ego competition, right? And they may also see this, a great power competition. You know, China and the US trying to compete and get a piece of land in the moon or Mars and make it like a geopolitical great power competition tool. So a lot of people understand space not in the ways of excitement. People have mentioned Star Trek. You mentioned seeing on the news and being inspired by when you were growing up. That exists, but it's almost squashed beneath all the news about the competition between great powers and these billionaires with their rockets. You know, it doesn't paint space a great picture for the future. And that was two big reasons why I wanted to write this book. But the biggest reason of all for me why I wrote this book was for my brother. He is 5 years younger than me, so he's a teenager now, but to me, he'll forever be 6 years old, which he is in this picture. But my brother is a huge space junkie, and what got him into space is Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars. During COVID, there wasn't a lot to do. So I remember we used to just like sit together and watch all these movies and TV shows and YouTube clips about space and about, you know, aliens and about the theories surrounding space. And, you know, like I noticed that there is a lot of gaps in the content that is put out there for the mainstream audience when it comes to space. That you have the great shows, the TV shows and the movies, and then you have NASA with their space news that gets really technical. But what about for the general audience who is curious about space, but may not have the time or ever enter the space fiction genre or got into, you know, the news, everyday news of NASA, right? They may just think of space as inaccessible and not for me. So I wanted to write something that could kind of bridge the gap and bring the public audience into space and essentially keep space a more optimistic space for the future of humanity, for science, for art. There is so much that we can use space for. You all are a society founded upon space's missions for humanity, right? So I think there is a lot of great ways that space can be a tool for good and not just for competition, for billionaires competing how much money they have. So I wanted to get into the nitty and gritty of that. And this is a photo that I think encaptures my wonder for space. I actually took this photo with a friend on a telescope 2 weeks ago at Georgetown. And we just like tried to get the iPhone camera on top of the telescope. And this is what we saw. And can you believe it? Like you can see the details of this moon. It's almost crazy. Like how many of you here have used a telescope before? Yeah, like, hey, not that many of you actually, surprised. But you can really just feel how close these things are to us. Like the moon, you can see the details, the craters of the moon. So I really want to capture that wonder, that curiosity that we should protect when it comes to space. So on the other side of what the mainstream audience associates with space is, hey, what's out there, right? And, you know, eventually what's out there leads to, are there aliens, right? You can't separate space from aliens, unfortunately. Like, doesn't matter if you're a NASA astrophysicist or someone who just, you know, happens to think about space once a year. Aliens is associated with space. But I think I really wanted to do a deep dive through my research. Who and what and where are the aliens, according to scientists and according to the general audience? So here are some images that represent what a lot of the people think about when they see aliens. If you know where any of these images are from, please raise your hand and let me know. Yeah?
Independence Day on the lower right-hand corner.
Yes.
And then the upper left-hand corner is the contact or something.
Okay, yeah.
The other two I don't recognize.
Okay, how about you on the back?
The top left is from Arrival.
Yes, yes. And then we have one more on the top right.
Okay.
Yes, Avengers. And how about the bottom left corner?
That's Avengers.
That's
Marvel.
Yeah, the Marvel universe, right? So Nathan, you mentioned that what got you really interested in space is Star Trek. This generation, what gets us interested in space, surprise, surprise, is Disney and Marvel. They do a great job selling space. You know, Disney makes a lot of plots surrounding aliens and their interactions with humans. But let's pause and think about what the messages about aliens really say for us. Okay, first, there are aliens that are actually alien animals. When we think of the aliens that are portrayed in movies, oftentimes what the movie makers are trying to do is instill this foreignness and fear into us. And, you know, like, I talked to an anthropologist while writing this book who studies space, and she said this great quote. She said, what we think are out there is essentially what we already have here, which means that we're just projecting our fears into space, right? And what we think is unfamiliar and alien on Earth into space. So for example, in this movie Arrival, there is this alien that has tentacles and it emits like some ink, and that's their mode of communicating through ink. Does that remind you of an alien animal on Earth? Yeah, squids, octopus maybe. So it seems that a lot of inspiration and thoughts we have surrounding aliens is already what we have here on Earth, that we presume and project onto space, which is kind of crazy because who's to say whatever is out there is associated with what's here at all, right? It shows us both the boundaries of our imagination, but also what we are kind of projecting out there. Second is alien nature. So this guy, his name, does anyone know? Groot, right? I am Groot. This is Groot from Avengers, and he's another alien. But can you tell from the way he looks that he's a bad alien or a good alien? What'd you say? A good one, yeah. And it's funny because he's supposed to be a tree. And supposedly we associate trees with the good aliens, right? It shows that what we think of as good and bad, we put in movies and say, this is a good alien and this is a bad alien. Octopus, maybe bad, but trees, probably good. It's really interesting how our psychology takes part into alien movies and our own images of aliens. And then we have alien foreign powers. So does anyone know where this image is from?
Yeah, Star Trek exploration.
Yeah. So I did some research into when Star Trek, the original series, what was the inspiration behind it. And it was really cool to find out that the inspiration behind the Klingons versus the Earth people was actually based upon the tension between Soviet Union and America. So the Klingons were inspired by Russians or Soviet Union, and Earth was Americans. And you can see that people in the theater wouldn't think twice about saying, yeah, those Klingons, those bad aliens. But they only felt that way, possibly because they already felt that way about Russians. Russians, those aliens, those bad people. So it's very interesting to see what we end up depicting as aliens in the movie theater and in mainstream media, because there is a lot of connection between what's happening here on Earth and what we think is going to happen out in space. So last one that I have here is alien threat against the US. And this kind of goes back to geopolitical tensions being projected into space. So something that you might notice about a lot of alien movies is they always want to come take over New York City. It's always New York. And recently with Chinese investment in filmmaking, they've included some Shanghai and Hong Kong. but usually the plot is the aliens want to come and take over the US, specifically New York City. And then we have these heroes protecting us from these alien threats. And that's also plays into our psychology. It seems that a lot of the audience want to believe and they buy into this narrative that the aliens will come and threaten America and threaten symbolism of America, the Big Apple, New York City. And that's why it sells. You know, these movies are not just indie movies, people. Like, they are the top grossing movies of all time, right? Can you guess what the top grossing movie is of all time, actually? I'm very curious if you guys have any good guesses.
Titanic.
Titanic's a good guess. What'd you say?
Avatar.
Avatar. You're right. Avatar, and surprise, it's also set in space. It's also about aliens. These movies really do sell. Like, people buy tickets and people spend money to suck in these plots. And what these plots show you is already traumas and fears we have internalized. That's why we buy into it, and that's why they're believable and enjoyable when we watch the movies. And I actually talk a lot about Avatar in my book because I find it so interesting how it's kind of like a bedazzled Pocahontas to me. It has the same plot if you think about it. It's about people going to a different planet on an alien land and trying to take over and exploit the territory. And the people fight, the indigenous people fight back. And of course, there's a white hero, a white man savior who will prevent the indigenous people from getting hurt. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. I think whoever came up with Avatar must have really loved Pocahontas. But yeah, I think these are all really interesting ideas of aliens that we have that sell in the news, sell in TV, sell in movies, and that the mainstream audience associate with when we think of aliens. And then on the other side of aliens, especially aliens that will come and do us harm, are the heroes who will protect us from these harms. And on the movies, they might be Captain America, right? Or the Avengers. Or it might be real life heroes like NASA. So I think the true space age is here. It's unquestionable. We all know we're living in the Artemis generation now. For some of you, you guys are really lucky to get to live through both the Apollo and Artemis generation. Lucky you guys. But it really comes to show that there is a lot of history and politics and psychological patterns in what we associate with space. And we need to unpack exactly what we do think of as foreign out there and what we think of as the heroes up here, protecting us from what's out there. I think there's a great danger in just assuming what is good and what is bad, what is alien and what is Earth. And I want to touch upon that and encourage that conversation through my book. And sometimes the heroes don't wear NASA spacesuits. Sometimes for people, they look like these people. Personally, my brother and his friends, they love Elon Musk. And I asked them, why do you love Elon Musk? And he said, you know, he's a great inventor. He has done things that no other human has done before. And I think that's a very valid reason. But we do have to think about the images that they represent when they are the ones leading our humanity into space. They are three, not just Musk, but Bezos and the Virgin Galactic guy. They're all, yeah, sorry, can't remember his name, but they are all very privileged. I mean, the 1%, the 0.01% of the world leading us into space, right? And they are going to be the ones deciding the narrative. They have a stake on the table about what happens in the space age. But are they aware of the narrative that they are painting by merely just being the leaders of the story? Are we at risk of repeating Avatar? Or are we at risk of repeating Pocahontas? You know, like, does history repeat itself, right? Is it always going to be European colonizers who want to colonize one thing or another? You know, these are all valid questions. What would this space age look like if it wasn't 3 wealthy white men, but say 3 women of color from different socioeconomic backgrounds? Would the story be different? Very possibly so. So we need to think about what kind of socioeconomic impacts we are experiencing as the space age is being written by these 0.1%. So the chunk of my book is set on principles of engagement, diplomacy with aliens. And to kind of go back to what we think of and associate with aliens, I had a lot of fun writing these chapters. Essentially, the big question that I was answering through my writing and research was, how do we form peaceful relations with something we have nothing in common with, right? And you'll be surprised, this question doesn't just apply to diplomacy with aliens. It's a question I have to answer every day at school, in the School of Foreign Service, right? How do you form relations with something that is foreign? And there's no answer, guys. Like, if there was just one answer, I would take that one class and be out of Georgetown. But there's so much debate going on still about how to form peaceful relations with foreign states and foreign nationals and foreign people here on Earth. Like, we don't know what we're gonna do when it's something truly foreign, like outer space foreign. And I think it's really important that we think about the kinds of dialogue we have in diplomacy on Earth, because essentially we're going to be using those same tools to form relations with aliens. But I think what was super, super interesting though, is we don't even know what forms of communication these aliens will have, right? Here on Earth, at least with a foreign power, you assume you're verbally communicating, you're tangibly communicating. There are things we have in common. But with aliens, there's like nothing. There's like nothing that we can assume that we have in common. And that comes for a great like thought platform, thought experiment. And I have some thoughts. And these are essentially the principles that I came up with for when it comes to something truly foreign. So I split it into 3 principles of engagement. And the first baseline that I came up with is cognitive empathy, purpose, and patience. And these are actually derived from what I learned at school. When it comes to successful, peaceful diplomacy, you need to understand how to form compassion, how to have a common purpose, and how to have patience. And this can be applied to whatever is out there. And I thought that was really cool, that what I'm learning in class is actually useful for what might happen 100 years from now in outer space. And second is communication. And communication is key to diplomacy. You can't have relations if you can't communicate. I'm saying apples and you're saying oranges. We'll never get anywhere. We'll have great juices, but nothing more than that. And the last thing I find integral to engaging peacefully is soft power and cultural diplomacy. And this is my take on international relations. A lot of scholars divide themselves into different schools of IR, or international relations. Some people might be more realists, which means you think in terms of hard power and of nuclear weapons, and you think in terms of sanctions, like punishments and rewards. They might associate themselves in the school of liberalism, which associates more with institutions, trying to find institutional ways of regulating ourselves and informing relations through those regulations. And I'm kind of in the last school, which is constructivism, which is it's a newer school in diplomacy, which says that it doesn't matter what our past is, it doesn't matter what our political differences are, we can form relations if we have a basic understanding of our culture and understanding of what makes each of us tick, kind of. It's a very interesting take on politics. And I think there is a lot of successful examples of diplomacy based on sports, based on food, sharing of music and art. The Olympic Games is one great example. I'm from Korea, right? And surprisingly, no one has asked me which part of the Korea is, which I'm very grateful for. But North Korea is still at war with the South, and our relations have improved dramatically during the last Olympics, the Winter Olympics, not the last, the second last Olympics, the Winter Olympics, when we formed a united hockey team. And that was kind of crazy for us because imagine two countries at war and they're competing in the same team. That triggered a whole bunch of positive domino effects and helped our diplomacy move forward. So there are creative ways to think about diplomacy when it comes to what we may think as so alien, so alien that we're still at war. Yeah, so I want to bring it back. Sure. Enough of the aliens. What I really want to say is that thinking about what's out there, essentially, it all starts right here, right? Like at the baseline of everything, I think, is what we are curious about on Earth, what we think of as aliens on Earth. Is it the refugees? Is it the immigrants? Is it Republicans, Democrats? Is it someone from a different religion? I think there are so many ways that we are fearful and hopeful here on Earth that we project out into space. And I think that's why space is a great thought platform to help improve lives even here on Earth. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking at what's out there. I'm just saying that Earth is also a great place to start. And by looking at what's out there, we might be actually making lives here better as well. So yeah, and now I want to talk a little bit, this is the last thing I'll speak about, I promise. It's what I hope the book will achieve now that it's out in the world. Yeah, I didn't expect my book to actually publish. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna actually write a book that people will buy, but people are buying, and I have like friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends and new friends sending me photos of their copies, and I'm like realizing, wow, okay, like my ideas are actually like influencing people's thoughts and opinions. And I'm very glad that it's happening, but what I really want people to take away from this book is that there is a lot of space for wonder and curiosity and compassion, as well as collaboration here on Earth. And it can happen in conjunction with space. We don't have to abandon one thing or the other. We just have to make sure that we're not forgetting one thing or the other, right? Like we can't think about space without thinking about Earth. And we can't think about Earth without thinking about space. Earth is just one dot in billions and billions and trillions out there in the universe. So we just need to make sure that we have perspective. And I hope that any reader who reads my book will take away that when they read it. But yeah, that is my talk. If we have any questions, I'm happy to answer. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the process you went through to write the like nobody here?
No. I'm listening.
No, it should be good. So can you talk about the process you went through to write the book? How did you come up with the topic? Were there any topics that you originally considered but ended up not included?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. So your question was, can I talk a little bit more about how I came to write this book, and were there any what was the process like, and were there any parts or topics that I had to exclude in the final product? Okay, so the process was actually like, it was very like miraculous. Like, I didn't plan to write a book, I think. It was more like I'm a very creative person, and when COVID hit, I wanted a creative project. So I was like, hey, I'll do a podcast. And I teamed up with a professor at Georgetown to start a podcast series. And at this point, I was kind of trying to pick a topic that was both topical and interesting and, you know, for the general audience, and also like personal to me. And my brother got kind of sick last year during COVID, and I wanted to connect with him better. And, you know, like I said, he's a huge space junkie. So it became like a no-brainer for me. Like, I'll do a podcast series on space. And then as I was like researching, you know, the floodgates open, like, oh my God, there's so much happening right now. Like, we're living in the true space age, y'all. And then my professor was like, okay, Elena, like, I think this is like bigger than a podcast series. You need to like write a book or something. And I said, okay, let's do it. So I hopped on like a hybrid publishing program that was all online. And I got really lucky because my professor was also the director of that program as well. And I had so much fun just cold emailing like astronauts and like astrobiologists and people who work at bigger institutions like that, because everyone was lonely. COVID was happening and everyone was sitting behind their desk, like twiddling their thumbs, like, what is happening? So I guess like a lot of them were glad that I reached out and wanted to like connect with humans. So I just had a really good time collecting resources from people. I talked to like professors in colleges, some archaeologists, like a lot of interesting opinions came together to form my book. And if there were anything that I had to leave out in the end, I think I have something. I wanted to talk a lot more about the burgeoning commercial sector when it comes to space. One of the last interviews I did was with a venture capitalist who works with space technology startups, especially like satellite startups. And he seemed very defeated almost when it came to the commercial sector in space because of all the barriers. There's a lot of legal barriers to work in space because there aren't a lot of laws surrounding space right now. Like, space policy is a growing field, but it's not established yet. So a lot of the entrepreneurs felt like there were too many barriers to enter the space technology market. But what I found out, and what is like a key point in all like international policy theories, is there needs to be an open and burgeoning market for there to be growth, for there to be conversations, and for access to the public. And these are all essential for the future of space. And I really wanted to dive into that, but I just thought it was like a bigger topic that I didn't want to just scratch the surface and move on. Maybe it'll be my like second book. I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions? And you can drop questions online as well. Yeah. I will answer anything.
Is your book in print?
Yeah, I actually brought a few copies, and I'm glad you asked because my sister, she is a really talented graphic designer, and she was so inspired by my project and space in general through the course of me writing the book that she painted some art to go along with my book, and I brought them here today. So if you purchase a book today, I can give you the art as well. It's a very special occasion, and I only have a few, so I'm glad I brought it because I like you guys. Yeah.
From your explanation, it sounds like we got basically sentience from the point of view of a humanoid form. So if you did touch on non-humanoid sentience, it seems to me that dealing with all of that, it's very similar to the problem we have when the Europeans came to the United States. They destroyed the Indian culture. When we went to Australia, we destroyed the Australian culture.
Yeah.
Okay. That has a broader application in that if if I have a life form that basically is not humanoid, and it tends to be sentient, and it also uses a slightly different ecosystem, I may find it to be a great place to set my house, but on top of it, I may be destroying the ecosystem of a sentient civilization, or a sentient that's developing under a slightly different parameter. I'm assuming that you dealt with that mostly on the side, that you kind of keep it down the middle, because most people identify with humanoid sentience and humanoid evolution there from an ecosystem point of view. Am I kind of on target with what you were trying to do with the book?
Yeah, so you're saying that like a lot of people, when they think about like settling on a different planet and exploiting their resources, are more cautious about that because of the harm we do to the species there. Is that your point? That I might have touched upon that? Yeah, I for sure did. I think actually writing about this book has made me an environmentalist, and that's kind of radical for me because I didn't care much about climate change last year, but writing about this book has opened my eyes to the fragility of this planet. I took part in this meditation called the Overview Effect meditation, and it's led by a group of astronauts who have been in space and have looked down upon Earth. And they have all like had this very visceral reaction when they see Earth from space. It's just noticing how rare our life forms are, how rare it is to be on this planet along with other animals, other sentient animals, right? And I think we're destroying our planet, right? Like humans are responsible for so much destruction that's happening. Greta Thunberg is going around trying to teach us all that, you know, we need to do something about climate change. But like, if it shows anything, it's that we're still figuring out how to cohabitate with species on Earth, right? So what's to say we're gonna do a great sustainable job when we go out there in space, right? And they don't need to be just sentient beings, right? Like they could be anything. But as long as they're a species, like we need to understand how to cohabitate in a way that we're not destroying the environment and not only making it unsustainable for the animals and the species there, but for ourselves as well. And just hopping along different planets is a great long-term solution if we have the technology, but it's gonna take us a while to get there. So I think we all need to understand a little better how to be an environmentalist so that like it can work in our favor at the end as well. Okay. Do you think that community-driven or cultural efforts will have a huge impact on the way commercialization of space unfolds? Oh, okay. I'd love it, Ian, if you could like drop a few examples of what you mean by community-driven or cultural efforts. But if he means like just the way that, yeah, I'm not really sure what your question is getting to, community-driven or cultural efforts. Maybe he's talking about like the way that we narrate like space between different cultures. Like an indigenous culture might think of space differently compared to, I don't know, people in Tokyo or like people in the North Pole or South Pole, right? Like, would culture have an impact on some research and development being performed? Oh, okay, I see. I lost my voice?
No, it's fine.
Okay, so Ian's question is, drilling into moon or Mars. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it definitely has to be relevant with like agencies trying to have a stake in what's performed on Moon and Mars, like mining and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of controversy behind mining even here on Earth, right? With like communities trying to stop mining for one reason or another. So I think that it would apply to space. Maybe like there are local agencies that are against drilling in the Moon or Mars, but I'm not too sure like if I have any information on that. And Barbara says lots of science fiction has assumed that space colonization will be driven just like American colonies by people unhappy with the social/religious environment at home and go off to do their own thing. That's also a valid point. Yeah. How are you doing on time, Nathan? Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Ian, I'm sorry. I don't think I have a great answer besides like I can see it having an impact for now, but I don't see any examples in real life. Yeah, sorry, what was your question?
I like the presentation, but I have a question on the last thing you were talking about, because I think a lot of missing elements when we talk about why do we go into space? Why is it important for human beings to explore?
Yeah.
And the question is the difference in the nature between man and animal.
Right. Oh,
and we are not the same as animals.
Yeah.
And so we can actually make creative discoveries. So that's where the difference becomes when we start talking about environmentalism in that way, because we try to put ourselves in the same category.
Yeah.
But animals can't go to the moon and find helium-3 and make better sources of energy. Right. So we're actually improving the earth by being able to make these creative discoveries.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point. There is a distinction between obviously human species and other animal species, right? There is a distinction in intelligence, right? But I think it's less of what could happen and what might happen versus the mindset. And I'm just saying that we need to talk about the vocabulary we're using right now. I actually had a friend tell me that he believes that species can be ranked and humans are at the top because we're rare and that we're very intelligent. So he thinks that justifies going to other planets and exploiting their species because we are more intelligent and we are rare, therefore special. And this is called the Anthropocene era, which is an era where we believe we're special and we believe we have the right to do things on behalf of other animals because of our intelligence, right? But let's pause and think about where that mindset stems from and where we have seen historic precedents of that mindset. I talk a little bit about colonization and exactly what words colonizers use when they took over indigenous people's lands in South America or in Africa. They use words like savages, uncivilized, don't know how to think, need our help because they don't know how to use tools.
Manifest destiny.
Yeah, manifest destiny. And it's insane how much people back then, explorers back then, would believe that the people that they were exploiting were totally okay with it because they were savages, right? And animal-like, right? Equate them to animals. So we need to be very cautious about the mindset that we're using in order to not to repeat that history, because we all know that we're still recovering from that past, right? And so we might be justified now to say, oh, there are absolutely a way to rank species, but we need to make sure that we're not being too arrogant, because look where arrogance got us, right? In the past with colonization, exploration is always the fine line between the ethics of it and the technology side of it. And we just need to make sure that we're aware of both sides of it. And it's not such a black and white answer, but to answer your question, I think there is certainly something to say about the mindset that we're repeatedly using when it comes to exploration. Yeah. What makes you think there are any aliens we will be able to contact? Is that the question? Do you think?
Last one, what species are
other planets? There are no species in the solar system. And then Yvonne says, Barbara, you do not know that 100%. I mean, I am not the god of the universe, and I do not know what species are out there, but I did talk to some astrobiologists who have thoughts. And, we have just scratched the surface on going to the moon and understanding what microorganisms or bioorganisms exist in Venus. If you guys remember last year, there was that big event with people seeing a signature of life. Yeah, right, phosphine on Venus. And I actually talked to someone who was who worked with that research team, and he says, "Oh my God, this is the biggest thing that happened. Like, this is a huge step towards finding ETI." And then I talked to him like a month after. He's like, "Oh my God, that was not false alarm. Like, that might not be true." So I think we're basing a lot of our work on assumptions, right? So sadly, Barbara, I do not know what other species are out there, and I can't say that there aren't any species out there. Neither can I say there are species out there. I cannot confirm nor deny that. Yeah.
In your research, you established the two camps that are engaged in space, the people who are like mostly science fiction, and then the people pretty much who are here who are engaged in space, and you're bridging the gap between. In that, your research for that group in between, did you come across any sort of generalized common perceptions or misperceptions about space that sort of jumped out at you in terms of how the general public thinks?
Yeah, something that I found very concerning was how many people don't want to engage with space because they just see it as like this battleground for people in power. Like they think it's like a war zone waiting to happen, right? Yeah, a lot of people don't have very optimistic views on space, I found. And you know, it's no surprise why. If you look at what countries that are leading space explorations are doing, Space Force, right? And yeah, like we have China with their own version as well. And we are increasingly developing intercontinental missile system or ballistic missiles, like, or weapons to use in space, right? And there's nothing that prevents wars from happening in space right now. There are no laws that say like that will like actually stop wars from happening in space. So you know, like a lot of countries are still at war on Earth. What's not to say it will extend in space, especially with the biggest players heading space exploration being countries that were at war before, right? Does history repeat itself? Hopefully not. Like it could, you know. So I really wanted to write a book that had a more optimistic tune to it, because I don't think that's a great way to engage with space. Like you begin with a defeated attitude, you will not get anywhere, right? So I want to write a book that can encourage people like my brother, who is the future of space explorers, to understand space from a more optimistic and like hopeful perspective.
David has a question.
Oh yeah.
You don't count as sentient.
Oh wait, what? What's happening? Sentient species. There are over 3,000. We won't be okay. I'm getting lost in the comments. We don't count as sentient species?
Yes.
I think we do. I don't understand that question. Yeah, I think he might be responding to a different question. A different comment.
What's
Yeah.
going to happen? What happened with is there any development going on with a space program for Korea?
Korea, oh, Amika and I talked about this, that I love my country. It's a very small country. And we actually, my first encounter with space was when I was, I think like 6 years old. And our very first astronaut was blasting off on a Russian spaceship. And, yeah. And the astronaut was a she. And yeah, our very first Korean astronaut was a woman. And that was a game changer, I think, for me. Like I wanted to be an astronaut so badly because I still do. But yeah, like I think having representation was a huge factor in why I wanted to study space. But she actually naturalized to be an American because of how small the space program is in Korea. So to answer your question, no, Korea is, I think, a little bit preoccupied with the war right now with North Korea to focus on flying off into space. But I have met a lot of, in this process of research, I have met a lot of people who are trained to be astronauts, but they all kind of have plans to naturalize into different countries with space agencies so that they can actually go into space, which is unfortunate, but just the reality, right? Space is it takes up a lot of space and money, so you need to have a country.
Well, now that, okay, because that model is based on governments launching people into space, so that's why people are naturalized. But if the private, the three guys that you showed up on the screen there are successful, then you won't have to do that.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I wanted to work for, and this is more personal, but I wanted to work for SpaceX. And I like tried to network my way in there, and then they were all like, "Oh, you're such a great candidate, except you're not American." They aren't accepting they aren't accepting any people to work for them unless they're American, because of how deeply tied it is with NASA, which is a federal agency.
Right. They launch government military projects.
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's still a barrier for people who aren't American.
I should have David to ask his question.
Okay. Hi, David.
Hello. So I see from your bio that you speak a number of different languages. Was it 5? What 5 do you speak, and how familiar are you with the different cultures of those different languages?
Oh, great question. Okay. So in my bio it says I speak 5 languages. As false advertising. I am semi-fluent in 2 and fluent in 3. So I speak English, Korean, and French. And I am semi-fluent, I would say business fluent in Mandarin and Vietnamese. And as for the cultures, I grew up in Vietnam. So I'm very familiar with Vietnamese culture. It's home for me. I'm Korean, so I'm familiar with the Korean culture. I've been to France, and Vietnam was actually colonized by France. So there are a lot of expats in Vietnam who are French. So I feel like I'm pretty familiar with the French culture. English is not really a culture, but I'm familiar with America. Let's see. Mandarin. I have a lot of Chinese friends or friends who speak Mandarin from mainland China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. So I'm quite familiar with those cultures as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. So I'm wondering if, so I work for NASA. I learned quite a bit of Russian and Japanese and the cultures of both, and how different those are from American culture. And it seems to me that might be a good basis for trying to understand some new culture if we ran across such a new culture, to understand the people, to understand their culture. What do they value? How do they rank certain things as what they value more than others? That seems to be one of the key differences that I've seen in studying different cultures, is how different people rank and prioritize different things.
Yeah, I actually think like being multilingual and multicultural was a huge tool for me to write a book about space, because I tend to not say I'm from one place when I introduce myself. Like I really think of myself as a global citizen. I know it's a cliche, but I really think I am a humanist. Like I just grew up having to learn different cultures and languages right off the bat, and learning how to be very, very empathetic so that I can try to understand their culture better, right? And there's a study that I included in my book that shows that people who are bilingual or are multilingual have greater ability to show cognitive empathy. And there's a bit of a duh connection there, because when you learn a language, you also learn its culture, and you get to develop those tools of empathy. But I think that was very fundamental in me trying to understand humanity from a more like objective point of view, because I get to experience, or I have experienced what it means to be not just a human from one place, but from like all over the world. But yeah, to kind of answer your question, David, I think being multilingual is a really important asset to studying space.
Okay. So if there were ever some contact with some aliens, then having somebody that had multicultural experience of human species might be good as potential ambassadors.
Right, like myself. Yeah, I agree. I think being
we'll elect you.
Yeah.
We'll elect you to represent.
I will definitely run when the position becomes available.
Well, this touches on the notion that the language that's learned to speak also structures how you think.
Yeah.
And this has to do with things like some languages are subject, verb, object, others are structured object, verb, subject, and that this has a definite impact on how you approach understanding phenomena around the world. Basic things like light, fire, electricity, how to structure your understanding of that. And so having had these exposure to these multiple different languages and how they are structured allows you to look at a single phenomenon in from different directions, from different sides, that I think people who only speak one language don't even really understand that they are hampered in this respect.
Oh my God, yes. You're actually reminding me of a problem I had growing up once I became multilingual. Was my teacher would ask me to write an essay or like speak on the debate team. And then you know how like when you write an essay, you have to choose like a pro or con, and same with debate. And I would always be that girl, be like, but I think of both. I can't pick a side because I understand both sides. But like looking back, I was, well, at that time I was really frustrated. I was like, why can't I just pick a side? But now I look back and I think I just had like an innate ability that I like nurtured over time to really understand both sides or all sides. So yeah, for sure, it's important to be multilingual if you want to be a more like empathetic person.
Yes, you might have a good career as a negotiator somewhere.
Yeah.
You have that ability.
Yes, for sure.
I think we're just at time.
Yes.
So,
okay.
But we can hang around and continue discussions on a more ongoing basis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We're going to buy her book. She's here. She's going to autograph it, and you can talk to her about it.
And you get free art.
And you get included art.
Yes. Thank you so much.
And we can just keep everybody online. Y'all can talk to each other if y'all want. Kind of have socialize online as we socialize in the room. Before we move on, though, I thought I would tell y'all about our next meeting. Real quick. So this is a learning process, right? This is the first time we've met here, and we kind of envisioned it being slightly different than what it was with like a projector and everything. So just some learnings that we got from today. I think we definitely need a projector with a screen. It's hard to read these, but having these a little further back we might do. I think we also need amplification. So you're gonna also notice that these little windows on the top here are closed. So lots of little improvements we can make for the next meeting. But y'all have been a fantastic audience, very quiet and patient, and lots of good questions. Really appreciate that. So a round of applause for y'all. And I really want to thank Masa over there for kind of handling the interaction between online and in person. It's really challenged. She's been monitoring what they've been hearing and just like, oh, you need to speak up and repeat the question and stuff. So everybody online really needs to give her a shout out. She's been really looking out for you. And I want to thank our speakers. So Greg, great speech. And also Elena, thank you so much. And
also, JR, thank you for the video and audio setup. So really appreciate that. And if y'all have some advice on things that we could do in addition to those to make it better next time, just let me know after the meeting. I'll write them all down, and next time it'd be even more smooth than it was this time. So, but our next meeting is going to be here November 6th, Saturday, November 6th at 2 p.m. And I'm going to basically put together a presentation what I learned from the Interstellar Symposium. So Barbara, you definitely want to come to that. We didn't discover aliens there, but we do have some ideas on how we might find them. So we can talk about that. But thank you all very much, and feel free to stick around as much as you want. Keith is our treasurer. You want to, and we're collecting donations to kind of cover some of our costs. So if you feel like contributing, you can take your money and give your receipt and put it in our bank account. Your contribution may be tax deductible, but you'll need to get your own tax advice. And then also we have a whole bunch of Ad Astra magazines in the back. Please take them, even if you don't want them. You're giving them to somebody else that might. Okay, well, thank you all very much. Thank you so much for being online. We're just going to keep you all online until you all drop off. Feel free to talk to each other. I think everybody can unmute themselves. Okay.
Well, I'm going to get back on the road. I took a rest stop break in Virginia, so we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Y'all take care. And I'll just turn this so everybody can see.